You think you know the man you sleep beside for 42 years. You think you know the sound of his truth. But sometimes, my dears, the truth doesn't have a sound at all. It sits in a locked box in the dark, waiting for a key held by someone you thought was your friend. The key my husband's best friend gave me after the funeral didn't just open a trunk. It opened a door to a past I never lived, to a life I never knew, and showed me that the man I buried was a stranger I had loved my whole life. Come, sit with me. Let me pour you some tea. I want to tell you a story about trust, and about the quiet way it can shatter long after you think the worst has already happened. This isn't a story about a loud fight or a slammed door. This is about the silence that comes after the last mourner has left, when you're alone with the ghost of a marriage and a single, tarnished key that feels heavier than the whole world. This is about the day I learned that the past isn't something that's behind you. Sometimes, it's a locked room you've been living next to for decades, and you didn't even know the door was there. The key came to me on a Thursday. The air still felt thin and strange the way it does after a great noise has suddenly ceased. The funeral had been on Tuesday. A gray day, a proper day for goodbyes. The house had been full of people, their voices a low respectful hum, their hands offering plates of food I could not taste. They spoke in the past tense already. He was such a good man. He was so proud of you. He loved this house. Their words were meant as bricks to build a wall against the grief. I accepted them, I nodded, I thanked them. Inside I was an empty room echoing with the silence he left behind. By Thursday the world had moved on. The casseroles were dwindling. The flowers on the mantel were beginning to bow their heads, their petals browning at the edges. The last of the family had caught their early flights. The silence they left was different. It was not the silence of absence. It was the silence of aftermath. The quiet when the work of public mourning is done and the private ache settles in for its long stay. I was in the kitchen wiping a counter that was already clean. The sunlight through the window was too bright, too ordinary. It felt like a betrayal that the sun would dare to shine. The doorbell rang, a sharp sound in the quiet. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened the door and there was Michael. Ernest's Michael. They had been friends since freshman year of college. Michael, who was best man at our wedding. Michael, who came for Thanksgiving every other year. Michael, whose laugh could shake the rafters in our living room. He stood on my porch now, but he was not laughing. He looked like a man who had not slept. His face was drawn, his eyes shadowed. He was holding his car keys, twisting them in his hands. "Ellie," he said. Just my name, but it sounded heavy coming from him. "Michael, come in. I just made coffee." I stepped back, holding the door. He didn't move. He shook his head, just a slight movement. No, I can't stay." His eyes wouldn't quite meet mine. They looked past my shoulder into the dim hall as if searching for something or someone. I have to give you something. Ernest, he wanted you to have it." He fumbled in the pocket of his jacket. It was an old brown leather jacket, I remembered. Ernest had one just like it. A shared affectation from their college days. Michael's hands were trembling. I remember thinking how strange that was. Michael, who was always so sure, so solid. He pulled out a small key. It was brass, tarnished with age and handling. It had a simple bow, a utilitarian shaft. It was not a decorative key. It was a key for a lock that meant business. He took my hand. His skin was cold from the autumn air. He turned my palm up and placed the key in its center. Then he closed my fingers around it. The metal was shockingly cold. It seemed to leach the warmth right from my skin. "He gave it to me a long time ago," Michael said, his voice low, hurried. "For safekeeping. He said to give it to you. When the time was right. After. The word hung between us. After what? After he was gone. After I was alone. After it was too late to ask any questions. What does it open?" My own voice sounded far away. Michael's gaze finally snapped to mine. The pain in his eyes was so raw, so immediate, it made me take a step back. It wasn't just grief. It was a kind of anguish. A guilty, tortured look that spoke of a burden carried for years. "The trunk," he whispered. "The old steamer trunk in the closet. I knew the one. A heavy leather-bound thing with brass corners. It had been a fixture in every home we'd ever shared. A silent, bulky guest in the back of a closet. I'd asked about it once early in our marriage. Ernest had patted it fondly. Just my old college relics, Ellie. Fraternity foolishness. Best left packed away. I had accepted that. A man was entitled to his past. A locked trunk was a boundary and I was raised to respect boundaries. He loved you, Ellie, Michael said suddenly urgently. His hand was still on mine, clasping it around the key. You have to remember that. Whatever you might think later. Whatever you find, he loved you. In his way. He did. In his way. Those 3 words. They slipped in like a shard of ice. A qualifier. A reduction. Love should not need a prepositional phrase. Love should be the whole sentence. He loved you. Period. Not in his way. Not as best he could. The simple unadorned fact that Michael felt the need to amend it, to defend it before I had even asked a question, that told me everything and nothing all at once. He released my hand. The key sat in my palm, a tiny cold weight. It felt enormous. Michael, what's in the trunk? He shook his head again, taking a full step back onto the porch. The distance he put between us was not just physical. It was a retreat, a closing of a door. I have to go, he said. I'm sorry, Ellie, I'm so sorry. And then he was gone, turning his back, walking quickly to his car. He didn't look back. I stood in the open doorway, the chill air wrapping around me, the key clenched in my fist. I watched his car back out of the driveway. The sound of the engine faded down the street and the silence rushed back in louder than before. I looked down at the key. It was just a piece of metal. Yet it felt like a live wire. A secret delivered. A duty transferred. Michael had been the keeper. The guardian of this little piece of brass and whatever truth it guarded. For how long? Years. Decades. All those Thanksgivings, all those shared beers on the patio, all those times he had smiled at me across the table, he had this in his pocket. He had this knowledge behind his eyes. The weight of that deception settled on my shoulders. My husband's best friend. My friend. Or so I had thought. I closed the front door. The click of the latch was final. The house was mine now. Truly mine. And it held a locked box full of my husband's ghosts and a key that his best friend could no longer bear to hold. I didn't go to the trunk right away. I walked to the living room. I sat in Ernest's chair. The leather still held the faint impression of him. I stared at the key in my open palm. For safekeeping. What kind of thing does a man give to his best friend for safekeeping? Not a will. That was with the lawyer. Not a ring. That was on my finger. Not a sentimental letter. That he could have left in his own desk. He gave him a key. A key to a lock he did not want me to open while he was alive. A key that was to be handed over only when he could no longer face the consequences. It was the ultimate act of cowardice dressed up as preparedness. He had outsourced his confession. He had made Michael the executor of his secret. And Michael, poor broken Michael, he had accepted this poisoned chalice. Out of loyalty, out of some twisted male pact. He had carried this for years, watching me living my life in ignorant bliss, smiling at him, offering him pie. The psychological toll of that must have been immense. The guilt in his eyes was not new. It was worn in like the creases in his old jacket. It was a familiar companion. He wasn't just grieving his friend. He was grieving the moment this key would leave his hand and enter mine. He was grieving the end of his vigil and the beginning of my devastation. I sat there for a long time. The sun moved across the floor. The key grew warm in my hand, taking on my own body heat. It was just an object. It could not hurt me. Only the truth it could unlock had that power. I had a choice. I could throw it away. I could drop it down the sink drain. I could bury it in the garden. I could choose to remain in the beautiful, peaceful aftermath where my husband was just a good man who had died too soon. But I was not built that way. I had shared a life with an engineer. A man who believed in solutions, in facts, in measurable things. You cannot live with a man like that for 42 years and not absorb some of his nature. A mystery was a problem to be solved. A locked door demanded a key. He had given me the key. In his convoluted posthumous way he had asked for the door to be opened. To leave it locked would be to disrespect the bizarre final wish he had orchestrated. So I stood up. The key felt heavier now, as if it understood its purpose was nearing. I walked down the hall to our bedroom. The room still felt like our room. His scent lingered on his pillow. I went to the closet. I pushed aside the hanging clothes, the familiar rough wool of his suits, the soft cotton of his shirts. And there it was in the back. The trunk. dark leather scarred from decades of movement. The brass lock gleaming dully in the closet's shadows. I knelt before it. The floor was hard against my knees. I could hear my own heart beating a steady frantic rhythm in my ears. This was the moment. The line between before and after. I held the key. I looked at the lock. 2 pieces of metal made for each other. This was the gift his best friend gave me. Not comfort. Not a shared memory. Not a story about Ernest's youth that would make me smile. He gave me the instrument of my own undoing. He gave me the truth that Ernest was too much of a coward to deliver himself. He placed it in my hand and he walked away. That was the final act of their friendship. The last loyal service Michael would perform for Ernest. And the first real betrayal he would enact against me. I took a breath. The last breath of the woman I was. The woman who believed in a single shared story. And I put the key in the lock. The key slid into the lock with a smoothness that felt almost obscene. There was no resistance, no gritty hesitation. It was as if the lock had been waiting oiled and patient for this very moment. That smoothness was my first clue that this was no forgotten relic. This was a maintained secret. Ernest the engineer would have approved of the mechanism's flawless operation. I turned my wrist. The sound it made was not a click. It was a heavy final clunk. A sound of machinery engaging, of something deep within giving way. It was the sound of a vault opening. In the absolute quiet of the closet that sound was enormous. It echoed in the small space and then was swallowed by the plush quiet of the house. I froze for a moment, my hand still on the key half. Expecting something to happen. An alarm. A voice. The ghost of my husband saying, "Stop Ellie, don't." But there was only silence. I removed the key. The padlock hung loose. I reached forward with both hands and grasped the cool brass handles of the trunk's lid. I took another breath, a shallow useless thing, and lifted. The lid rose without a sound on well-balanced hinges. Another maintained detail. And then the smell hit me. I don't know what I expected. The scent of old wool and mothballs perhaps. The dusty perfume of faded paper. The sweet decay of forgotten memories. This was none of that. The air that rushed out was cold and carried a sharp chemical tang. It was the smell of a new filing cabinet. Of laser printer toner. Of plastic sleeves and fresh ink. Underneath that was a faint sterile note like a doctor's office or a bank vault. It was the clean odorless smell of money. Of documents that mattered. It was not the smell of a past lovingly stored. It was the smell of a system meticulously kept. The shock of that smell alone made my vision swim. My stomach tightened. This was wrong. All wrong. A trunk of college memories should smell of nostalgia, of boyish things, of dust. This smelled of administration. I lowered the lid fully, letting it rest against the back of the closet. And I looked inside. Neatness. That was the second assault. An almost aggressive neatness. This was not a jumble of thrown-in mementos. It was an archive. Upright black filing dividers created sections like little cubicles. Clear plastic sheet protectors held papers facing outward for easy reading. There were 3 identical leather-bound photo albums, their spines labeled with silver numbers, 1, 2, 3. To the right stood a row of thick manila envelopes, their contents bulging slightly. And placed squarely in the center of it all, resting on top of a folder as if it were the cover page to this whole bizarre report, was a single white letter-sized envelope. My name was written on it. For Eleanor. In Ernest's handwriting. His precise, unwavering engineer's script. The same hand that had written shopping lists and Christmas cards and notes about when he'd be back from the hardware store. Seeing my name written like that in this cold, organized space made me feel like a client. A recipient, not a wife. My hands were steady. A strange detached calm had settled over me. It was the calm of shock, I suppose. The mind's defense against a reality too large to process all at once. It parcels it out in small manageable horrors. I picked up the envelope. It was heavy quality paper. My fingers found the sealed flap. I slid a finger underneath and tore it open. The tearing sound was loud in the quiet. I pulled out a single sheet of his personal stationery. The letterhead was embossed with his initials, EJG. I unfolded it. The date at the top was from 5 years ago. He had written this 5 years ago and left it here waiting. Ellie, if you are reading this, I am gone. And Michael has given you the key. I am sorry for the pain this will cause. It was never my intention for you to find out. The plan was for this trunk to be destroyed. But I suppose some part of me couldn't set the match. Or perhaps I thought you of all people deserved the truth. I stopped reading. I looked up from the page staring at the opposite wall of the closet at a row of his hanging shirts. The plan was for this trunk to be destroyed. So Michael's final duty was not just to deliver the key. It was to be the arsonist. To burn the evidence. But he hadn't. He gave me the key instead. A rebellion. A moment of conscience. Or had Ernest in some last-minute change of heart told him to hand it over? I would never know. I looked back at the letter. What you will find here is not a betrayal of love but a separation of lives. I have provided for you as I promised. The house, the pension, the accounts in your name, they are yours secure and untouched. What is in this trunk belongs to another part of my life. A part one chose to keep from you to spare you. To spare us both the drama. Please try not to hate me. Try to remember the good years. Ernest. I read it once. Then again. Then a third time, my eyes snagging on specific phrases as if they were thorns. Not a betrayal of love but a separation of lives. What exquisite cruelty. To redefine betrayal as logistics. To frame a double life as a simple matter of compartmentalization. He hadn't been unfaithful, he'd just been efficient. To spare us both the drama. Drama. He made it sound like a messy emotional scene of feminine indulgence. He had spared me the hysterics, the tears, the confrontation. He had given me instead a clean silent lie, a seamless fiction. And he expected gratitude for that. He had framed his deception as a courtesy. Remember the good years. And there it was. The command. The instruction for my grief. He was telling me how to mourn him. To take the portion of our life he had designated as good, and to hold it apart from the rot in this trunk. To perform a kind of emotional surgery, severing the corrupted limb to save the memory of the body. He was managing my emotions from beyond the grave. A hot wave of nausea rose in my throat. I swallowed it down. The calm was cracking. I could feel it splintering at the edges, letting in a seeping cold fury. I placed the letter carefully on the floor beside me. It was evidence now, part of the record. Then I turned back to the trunk. To the separation of lives. My hand went to the first file divider. The tab was a neat white label printed from a label maker. Deeds, Willow Creek. Willow Creek. A pretty name. A lakeside town about 2 hours north. We'd driven through it once, maybe 10-15 years ago, on a leisurely Sunday drive. We'd stopped for ice cream. Ernest had remarked on the quality of the playgrounds. Good schools here, Ellie. A fine place for a family. I had agreed, absently licking my cone, thinking he was just making conversation. Now the memory curdled in my mind. I pulled the folder out. Inside were plastic sleeves. The first held a property deed. I slid it out. The paper was crisp, official. It was for a house on Lakeview Drive. The names listed as grantees, the owners, Ernest J. Grayson and Catherine M. Brewer. Catherine M. Brewer. I did not know a Catherine. The purchase date was 15 years ago. 15 years. I did the math in my head. That was the year he got the big promotion. The year he said the stress was keeping him up at night. The year he started taking those long weekend, fishing trips, to clear his head. I stared at the two names side by side. Grayson and Brewer. They shared a line on a legal document. They shared a title, a covenant. I put the deed back. My fingers were starting to feel numb. I reached for the next folder. First Federal Bank, Joint ACCT Statements. I opened it. A year's worth of statements, paper clipped together. I flipped to the top of the stack. The account holder line read, Ernest J. Grayson and Catherine M. Grayson. Grayson. She had taken his name. Of course she had. He would have insisted. It was proper. It was orderly. He was a traditional man in so many ways. My vision blurred for a second, the numbers on the statement swimming into a gray haze. I blinked hard. The numbers came back into focus. Regular deposits. His salary being split automatically. Mortgage payments for the Lakeview Drive address. Grocery store charges. Payments to Willow Creek Pediatrics. Payments to Soccer Club of Willow Creek. A life. Itemized and deducted. I closed the folder. The numbness was spreading up my arms. I felt like I was watching someone else's hands moving through this box of ruin. I bypassed the other files for a moment. I needed to see. I needed the proof that was not numbers and legal phrases. I reached for the first photo album labeled *1. I opened it. The first page was a photograph in a clear sleeve. It was a sunny day. Ernest, maybe 10 years younger, his hair still thick and dark, standing on a wooden dock. He had his arm around a woman. She was blonde with a friendly open face, a wide genuine smile. She was leaning into him. He was looking at the camera, smiling too, but it was a different smile than I knew. It was relaxed, unguarded. His posture was easy. He looked happy, not content, not satisfied, happy, a buoyant, specific joy. The lake behind them was sparkling. I turned the page. The same woman, Catherine, visibly pregnant in a loose sundress. She was holding her rounded belly, both hands cradling it. Ernest stood beside her, his hand resting on her stomach. He was looking down at her profile, his expression one of such tender awe it stole the breath from my lungs. I had seen that look before. On his face in the delivery room when our son was born. But that was decades ago. To see it here captured again for a different child, a different mother, it was a violation of a sacred memory. Page after page, a chronology of deceit. A newborn baby girl swaddled in pink. Ernest holding her, his big engineer's hands looking impossibly careful. A toddler boy taking his first wobbly steps on a green lawn. Ernest crouched down, arms outstretched to catch him. Birthday parties with cartoon-themed cakes. Christmases with a tree piled with presents. School pictures with gap-toothed grins. A graduation photo. The girl, now a young woman in a cap and gown, beaming. She had his smile. Not a little bit. Exactly. The same crinkling at the eyes, the same slightly crooked tilt. The boy, now a teenager, holding a soccer trophy nearly as tall as he was. Ernest's hand on his shoulder, pride radiating from him. I turned the final page of the album. This one was more recent. Perhaps last year. It was a professional family portrait. They were on the porch of a lovely craftsman-style house, the one on Lakeview Drive, no doubt. Ernest stood in the center, his hair silver now but his posture still straight. Catherine was beside him, her arm linked through his. The two children, now young adults, flanked them. Everyone was smiling, perfectly coordinated. A happy family. A complete unit. I stared at their faces. At his face. This was the man who came home to me. Who ate my meatloaf. Who slept in my bed. This smiling patriarch on the porch was the same man who complained about the traffic, who read the newspaper at breakfast, who wore the slippers I bought him for Christmas. But he was also a different man. A man with a whole other heart beating in another chest. A man who had planted a second family tree and tended it in secret for 20 years. I closed the album. The soft thump of the cover was a period at the end of a sentence. The smell of the trunk, that clean, cold administrative smell, filled my nose again. It was the smell of his second life. A life without dust, without mothballs, without the messy entanglements of shared history. A life built from scratch according to his specifications. Neat, organized, photogenic. He hadn't just kept a secret. He had curated an alternative reality. And he had filed it away in a trunk like a backup hard drive. A life in a box. The letter on the floor beside me seemed to pulse with its own pathetic energy. To spare you the drama. I looked from the photo album to the bank statements to the deed. This was no crime of passion. This was a long-term project. A parallel enterprise. He hadn't stumbled into an affair. He had architected a duplicity. The unlocking was complete. The trunk was open. The past was no longer a vague, comforting story. It was a spreadsheet, a portfolio, a family album for a family I wasn't in. And I was left kneeling on the floor with the cold brass key in one hand and the scent of my husband's other life clinging to my clothes. I took each piece out of that trunk with a methodical slowness that was not my own. It was as if I were an archaeologist at the site of my own devastation, carefully brushing the dust from a civilization that had existed in secret beneath my feet. My hands moved but my mind floated somewhere above, watching this woman, this Eleanor, perform the autopsy on her marriage. The folders came first. Each one was a revelation, a brick in the wall of his other world. Tax returns, Grayson Brewer HH, the tax returns for a household. Filed jointly. Deductions for 2 dependents. He had claimed them. Of course he had. He was a precise man. He would not waste a deduction. I traced the numbers with a finger, the sums he had declared, the life he had reported to the government. It was all there in black and white, sanctioned by the IRS. In the eyes of the law, this household was as real as mine. More real perhaps, for it was documented here without the soft focus of memory. Willow Creek property tax, receipts. Every year, meticulously paid. He had never missed a payment. I knew that diligence. It was the same diligence with which he maintained our roof, kept the gutters clean, changed the furnace filters on schedule. He had simply extended his care to another address. Another home. Another family waiting for him to fix a leaky faucet, to mow the lawn. Education fund, J&M. Investment statements. 2 separate 529 plans. One for Jessica, one for Michael. Their names. He had named his son after his best friend. The irony was a sharp stone in my throat. Michael knew. He had to know. He had let his own name be given to this secret child while he sat at my table drinking my coffee. The statements showed regular contributions growing steadily over the years. He had planned for their futures. He had secured their educations. He was a good provider. A responsible father, just not only to the children I knew about. Insurance policies, life insurance. A policy with Catherine Grayson as the primary beneficiary. The children as contingent. The face value was substantial. Enough to pay off a mortgage and send 2 kids to college. He had insured his life for them. He had built a safety net for the family in the sunlight, while I, the wife in the shadows, had only the pension he couldn't have taken from me even if he wanted to. Then there were the envelopes. Thick with the mundane paperwork of a lived life. Utility bills for the Lakeview house. He had paid the electric, the gas, the water. I pictured him opening those bills at a desk in that house, maybe at the kitchen table after dinner. Did he sigh at the cost the same way he sighed at ours? Did he comment on the high water bill, suspecting a teenager of long showers? These ordinary slips of paper were perhaps the most intimate violation. They spoke of domesticity, of shared responsibility, of 1,000 unimportant moments that build a life. He had divided those moments too. A folder marked, medical, held pediatrician records, vaccination schedules, dental appointments. Growth charts. I saw the handwritten notes on a doctor's form. Father, Ernest Grayson, present at visit, yes. He had been there for their checkups. He had held their small hands while they got shots. I remembered a time our son had spiked a fever in the middle of the night. Ernest had been on a business trip. I had to handle it alone, driving to the emergency room, my fear a cold tight knot in my chest. Now I knew. He might have been in another emergency room holding another child's hand. His attention, his comfort, his presence had been a finite resource, and he had allocated it. But it was the photographs that did the true, the irreversible damage. The albums were not just records, they were narratives. He had not simply kept pictures. He had curated them. Album 2 showed vacations. A trip to Disney World. There he was wearing a silly hat, his arms around both children in front of Cinderella's castle. A beach vacation. He was building a sandcastle with the boy, his shirt off, looking younger than his years. A ski trip. They were all in matching sweaters, rosy-cheeked and laughing. These were not stolen weekends. These were full family holidays. Weeks at a time. He had told me he was at engineering conferences. The annual Western Regional Structural Integrity Symposium. I had pictured him in a stuffy hotel ballroom listening to lectures on load-bearing stresses. Instead he was riding It's a Small World, eating churros, watching fireworks light up the sky over Epcot. Album 3 was the everyday. The 1,000 small moments. Catherine making pancakes in a sunny kitchen. The kids doing homework at a dining table I didn't recognize. A backyard barbecue with neighbors, people smiling faces I had never seen. A Christmas morning living room littered with wrapping paper, a fire in the hearth. In one picture he was napping on a couch, a child asleep on his chest. The domestic peace in the image was a physical blow. I saw the passage of time not just in their growing faces but in his. I watched his hairline recede, his hair turn from pepper to salt. I saw new lines around his eyes, the gradual softening of his jawline. I was witnessing the aging of a man I lived with, but from a different angle, through a different lens. It was like watching a familiar movie from the perspective of a side character. The plot was the same, but the emotional center had shifted. And through it all, the crushing normalcy. The sheer boring everyday happiness of it. There were no dramatic poses, no forced smiles. These were the pictures of a comfortable, settled life. He looked at ease. He looked embedded. That was the word that came to me. He was embedded in their world as deeply and as naturally as he was in mine. This was not a seedy motel affair. This was a home. He had a favorite chair there, I was sure of it. He knew where the spare light bulbs were kept. He had a drawer for his socks. He probably took out the trash on Tuesdays. With every document, every photograph, the past I carried in my heart, my memory began to splinter and reform. It was a brutal process of revision. That weekend he was helping Michael with a basement remodel. He was likely at a school play. That Wednesday night he was working late. He was probably helping with algebra homework. That week-long industry training in Denver. He was at a beach building sandcastles. The distant look in his eyes. Over dinner. That wasn't work stress. It was the mental juggling of two sets of schedules, two family calendars. The slight impatience when I asked about his day. It wasn't me. It was the exhaustion of maintaining the fiction. The gradual retreat from our shared hobbies, the golf clubs that gathered dust. His leisure time was being spent elsewhere. He wasn't falling out of love with me. He was simply over-allocated. I began to understand the architecture of the lie. It was not a single towering falsehood. It was a vast sprawling structure built from countless tiny truths and omissions. A latticework of plausible excuses, routine absences, and manufactured busyness. He had built a second life not in the shadows but in the broad daylight of my trust. The most brilliant part was that he didn't have to hide a passionate secret lover. He just had to hide a whole ordinary life. And ordinary things are the easiest to overlook. The weight of it, the sheer volume of the deceit was what felt inhuman. This was not a mistake. It was a project, a lifetime's work. I thought of all the energy, the mental focus, the meticulous planning it must have required. The coordination of stories, the management of finances, the emotional labor of switching between roles. He had been the CEO of two separate family corporations. And I had been the unsuspecting board member of one, completely unaware of the other subsidiary performing just well enough to not raise alarms. The final item I pulled from the trunk was not a document. It was a small wooden box. Inside was a collection of childhood artifacts. A first lost tooth, a tiny hospital bracelet, baby girl Grayson, a clumsily made Father's Day card signed in a child's scrawl, "To the best dad in the world," a dried corsage from a school dance. The sentimental detritus of parenthood. He had saved these tender, silly, precious things. He had a box just like it in our attic for our children. He had saved their first teeth, their crayon drawings. He had loved those rituals of fatherhood. And he had replicated them perfectly in duplicate. That was perhaps the final cruelest understanding. He hadn't been faking it. The love in the photographs, the pride in the graduation pictures, the tenderness in the hospital bracelet, it was real. His capacity for love had not been absent from our marriage. It had been expansive. It had been large enough to encompass two separate worlds. He had not been an empty man. He had been a man dividing a full heart. And I was left with the inventory. The deeds, the statements, the tax forms, the photographs. A complete audit of a life parallel to mine. It was all so unbearably thorough. So professional. I sat back on my heels, surrounded by the paper trail of my own oblivion. The trunk yawned open, empty now. Its contents were spread around me on the bedroom floor, a mosaic of betrayal. The cold administrative smell had permeated the room. The past was no longer a story I could tell. It was a case file. And I was both the victim and the detective, standing over the evidence, unable to change a single fact. Every cherished memory, every moment of quiet contentment, every hard-won compromise of my 42-year marriage now had a hidden footnote, a secret counterpart happening in another town, in another house, with another woman. He had not just lived a double life. He had forced me to live a half-life. And I never even knew the other half was missing. The disintegration did not happen in a single crashing moment. It was a slow-motion collapse, a silent restructuring of the very ground beneath my feet. I would be standing at the kitchen sink and a memory would surface unbidden. A simple moment. A Tuesday evening perhaps. We are eating spaghetti. He is telling me about a problem with a bridge design at work. I am half listening, thinking about the grocery list. It was an unremarkable slice of life, the kind you forget by morning. But now, as I stood at the same sink, that memory would rise and it would be different. Now I would see the fork in his hand and wonder, was he thinking of another kitchen table? Did he eat spaghetti with them too? Did he have a different way of twirling the noodles for his other children? When he spoke of the bridge, was part of his mind calculating the distance he would drive that weekend to see them? The mundane memory would become infected with possibility. Every ordinary moment was now a question. A palimpsest. The original memory was still there, but written over in invisible ink was the shadow life, the parallel reality. I began to live in two times at once. There was the present, the empty house, the quiet tasks. And there was the past, which was no longer a linear story but a chaotic archive I was forced to recatalogue. My mind became a detective against its own will, piecing together a timeline I never knew existed. The year our daughter graduated from college. A proud weekend. He had seemed distracted during the ceremony. I thought he was emotional. Now I knew. That was the same weekend his other daughter, his Jessica, had her middle school chorus concert. He must have been torn. He chose our daughter's graduation. Was that a relief to him? The easier event to explain? Or did he sit in the stadium seats aching to be in a school auditorium 2 states away? I would never know, but the memory of his proud smile was now layered with his potential regret. The Christmas he gave me the pearl necklace. It was beautiful. He had seemed so pleased with himself. Now I wondered, did he give Catherine jewelry that same year? Did he buy matching gifts to simplify the shopping? Was my pearl necklace part of a bulk purchase? The thought did not cheapen the pearls. It hollowed out the gesture. The pleasure on his face was not about delighting me. It was about the satisfaction of a task completed for both households. An efficient check on a list. Our 30th wedding anniversary. We went to a nice restaurant. He was quiet, contemplative. I thought he was reflecting on our decades together. Now I calculated. His son Michael would have been about 9 years old then. A wonderful age. Had he spent the day before our anniversary at a little league game watching that boy swing a bat? Did he sit across from me at the candlelit table, hearing the echo of a crowd's cheer in his mind? His quiet contemplation was not about us. It was the mental shifting of gears from one family to another. Every vacation, every holiday, every minor milestone was now cross-referenced against the phantom calendar of his other life. The past became a prison of reinterpretation. I could not escape it. Sleep offered no respite. I would dream of photographs, but the faces would blur and shift. I would dream of the trunk, but it would be bottomless, and I would keep pulling out identical folders until I was buried in paper. The physical space of my own home turned against me. His chair by the fireplace was not just an empty chair. It was the chair of a man who sat here and thought of another fireplace. His side of the bed was not just empty. It was the side of a man who kept a different set of pajamas in a different closet. The garage where he tinkered with tools was the garage of a man who likely had a duplicate set of wrenches in another garage. My home was not a sanctuary. It was one branch of a duplex. A mirrored reflection of a place I had never seen. I would open a cupboard and see his favorite coffee mug. And I would think he probably has a favorite mug there too. The simple uniqueness of our life together was gone. Everything was potentially a copy. A duplicate. We were not special. We were one of two. The photographs in our own albums, our own smiling faces on our own vacations began to look staged to me. Forced. Were we happy, truly, or were we just performing the version of happiness he had allotted to this branch of his life? I stared at my own younger face beaming beside him on a beach in Maine. Did I look happy because I was? Or because I was ignorant? Is blissful ignorance true happiness? Or is it just a different species of pain waiting to be born? I became obsessed with gaps. The blank spaces in our shared calendar. The weekends he went fishing. The business trips. The evenings he worked late. I tried to map his absences onto the positive events in the other children's lives. A school play would likely be on a Thursday night. Did he have a late meeting that Thursday? A soccer tournament would be a Saturday. Was that a fishing weekend? I sifted through the debris of my memory for clues I had missed. The unfamiliar scent on his jacket once. Not perfume, something else. Sunscreen. Playground mulch. The odd receipt in the car for a gas station 2 hours north. I had asked about it. Took a wrong turn coming back from the job site. I had believed him. The most painful memories to reassess were the difficult times. The year I had my surgery. A hysterectomy. I was scared. He was efficient. He arranged the appointments, made sure I had what I needed. He was not unkind, but he was distant. I thought it was because he was bad with illness, that he felt helpless. Now I wondered, was he distant because his emotional reserves were depleted? Was he splitting his focus between my hospital room and another family's normal life? Was he making phone calls in the hallway, not to his office but to her? To them. The vulnerability of that time, my dependence on him, felt grotesque now. I had leaned on a man who was balancing another whole world on his shoulders. My pain was just one item on his crowded agenda. I thought about the quiet moments of intimacy, or what I had believed was intimacy. Lying in bed in the dark, talking about nothing. The future, the news, the neighbor's dog. Had his mind been elsewhere? When he said, "I love you," was it a reflex? A piece of dialogue meant for this particular scene in this particular life? Did he say it to her with the same automatic tenderness? Was the script identical? My own identity began to feel like a fiction. Who was I? I was Eleanor, Ernest's wife, a mother, a retired teacher. But if Ernest was not who I thought he was, then who was his wife? What was my role? I was not the sole partner, the confidant, the other half. I was a department head, a manager of one division of Ernest Grayson's enterprises. My entire adult life, my sense of self was built on a foundation of partnership that was in truth a triage. I had not lived a lie. I had lived a partial truth. And a partial truth is somehow more corrosive than a full falsehood. It means that the love, the moments of connection were real, they were just incomplete. He had given me real pieces of himself, just never the whole puzzle. This rewriting was exhausting. It was a full-time job of grief. The first grief for the man I buried. The second, deeper grief for the marriage I never actually had. I grieved for my own lost time. For the years I spent loving someone who was only partially present. For the energy I poured into a relationship that was from his side a calculated allocation of resources. I grieved for the woman I was, the trusting woman, the woman who believed in the solidity of things. That woman was gone, unlocked out of existence by a brass key. And with her went the simple joy of memory. Memory is supposed to be a refuge, a place you can visit to feel warm again. Now my past was a minefield. Every happy recollection had a potential pressure plate beneath it. Step on it and the explosion would not be sound but meaning. The meaning would disintegrate, leaving only ash and questions. I found myself talking to him. Not prayers, accusations. I would hold up a photograph from our album. "Where were you really?" I would say to his smiling face. "What were you thinking here?" The silence that followed was no longer the silence of absence. It was the silence of a void, a vacuum where the answers should have been. The man who could explain was gone. And he had taken the truth of my own life with him. The past was no longer a country I could revisit. It was a crime scene. And I was the sole survivor left to interpret the evidence with no one to confirm my theories. Every cherished moment was now a clue. Every smile a potential deceit. Every touch a possible diversion. I was stranded in the present with a past that had shattered into 1,000 sharp reflecting pieces, each one showing a different distorted version of the man I loved, the life I lived, and the woman I thought I was. The key had not just unlocked his secret. It had locked me out of my own history, leaving me homeless in time. The betrayal by Ernest was a monolith. A vast towering structure of deceit that blocked the sun. But the betrayal by Michael was the creeping shadow that that monolith cast. It was the cold that seeped in after the light was gone. It took longer to feel it, to understand its full shape. Because Michael's betrayal was not an act of commission. It was an act of sustained silent complicity. He did not build the lie. He was its custodian, and that in many ways was worse. I thought of Michael's face on my porch. The anguish in his eyes. The trembling of his hands. That was not the reaction of a man delivering a neutral package. That was the face of a man handing over a live grenade and knowing he had to turn and walk away. He had known, for years, perhaps for the entire 20-year span of Ernest's other life. He had held the key. He had been the emergency contact for the secret. My mind began to circle back through decades of friendship. Michael was a bachelor. He had never married. He was married to his work, he would joke. He was our constant third. The extra chair at the Thanksgiving table. The one who always remembered my birthday with a tasteful card. The one who would help Ernest with a home repair project, showing up on a Saturday with his toolbox and a six-pack of beer. How many of those Saturdays were a cover? How many of those fishing weekends did Michael provide the alibi? Oh yeah, Ellie, Ernie and I are heading up to the lake. Just us guys. No cell service. He would say it with an easy smile. A smile I trusted. He was my friend too. Or so I believed. I replayed conversations. A memory surfaced, sharp and painful. About 10 years ago, we were all on the back patio. A summer evening. The citronella candles were smoking. Ernest had gone inside to get more ice. Michael and I were alone for a moment. He was quiet, staring into his drink. "You're a good woman, Ellie," he had said suddenly, his voice uncharacteristically soft. I had laughed it off. "What's brought this on?" He just shook his head. You are. He's a lucky man." There was a weight to his words, a sadness I didn't understand at the time. I thought he was just being sentimental, maybe a little drunk. Now I heard it differently. It was an apology, a lament. He was looking at me, the loyal, unsuspecting wife, and the guilt was a stone in his throat. He knew as he sat at my table, ate the food I cooked, laughed at my jokes. He knew that the man sitting beside me was living another life. He knew that the marriage we all celebrated was a beautiful facade. And he said nothing. He raised his glass in toast to our anniversary. He sent us congratulations cards for our milestones. All the while he was the keeper of the truth that would vaporize those celebrations. Why? Why did he do it? Loyalty to Ernest, of course. That male bond forged in youth often seems impervious to morality. But it was more than that. Ernest had made him a part of it. By giving him the key, by trusting him with the secret, Ernest had bound Michael to him in a pact of silence. To break that pact would be to betray his oldest friend. And so he chose instead to betray me. To betray the truth. He chose the living friend over the unknowing wife. He chose the manageable guilt of complicity over the explosive chaos of revelation. He had watched me age. He had seen me worry about Ernest's health. He had heard me talk about our plans for retirement. All those conversations were a form of torture for him. He had to sit and listen to the fictional narrative, knowing the behind-the-scenes reality. He had to nod and smile and contribute to the fiction. That takes a kind of fortitude, a coldness, or perhaps a profound weakness. I thought about the logistics. Did he ever meet her? Catherine. Did he know the children? Was he, Uncle Michael, to them? Did he attend their birthday parties? The image was unbearable. Michael holding a secret nephew on his knee in a sunny backyard in Willow Creek, then coming to our house for a barbecue and talking about the stock market. The more I thought about it, the more his every kindness, every gesture of friendship curdled into something suspect. That time he helped me paint the living room after I mentioned it was looking dingy. Was that guilt? The Christmas he brought me an especially lovely orchid. Was that blood money? His consistent, reliable presence in our lives? Was it just him monitoring the situation, keeping an eye on the other branch of Ernest's life to make sure the secret remained intact? He had been the backup system, the fail-safe. If anything ever happened to Ernest, Michael was the designated revealer. He was the one tasked with the messy emotional labor of handing me the truth. Ernest had outsourced his conscience, and Michael had accepted the job. I picked up the phone a dozen times, my finger hovering over his name in my contacts. I wanted to scream at him, to demand answers. What did you know? When did you know? How could you sit in my house and look me in the eye? But I never called. What would be the point? To hear his stammered excuses. To listen to him say he was just being a loyal friend. To hear him parrot Ernest's line about sparing me the drama. It would only be salt in the wound. A second confrontation with a ghost. Michael was now just another ghost haunted by his own choices. My anger at Ernest was pure and direct. It was the anger of a wronged spouse. But my anger at Michael was more complex. It was laced with a deep, sickening disappointment. He was not my spouse. He was my friend. The betrayal of friendship is a subtler poison. It kills trust in a different way. It makes you question your own judgment. How could I have been so blind? What signs did I miss? Was his friendship ever real? Or was it always just an extension of his loyalty to Ernest, a duty performed to keep the whole rickety structure standing? I looked at the world of men differently now. Their quiet bonds, their unspoken understandings. The way Michael and Ernest would share a look sometimes. I had thought it was shared history. Now I wondered if it was shared guilt. The secret passed between them like a silent baton. Their friendship was a closed loop, a circuit that excluded me and included the other woman, the other children. I was on the outside of my own marriage and I hadn't even known. The weight of Michael's knowledge must have been immense. To see a friend commit such a sustained betrayal and to say nothing. To watch an innocent woman live a half-life and to offer no rescue. That is a heavy thing to carry. It explained the sadness I sometimes saw in him, the solitary bachelor life. He had made himself an island because he was guarding a secret that would sink any ship that came too close. He could not have a real relationship of his own because how could he ever explain the monumental lie he was helping to maintain? His life was stunted by Ernest's deceit too. He was another casualty, just a more knowing one. But he had a choice. Every single day for 20 years he had a choice. He could have come to me. He could have told Ernest he wanted no part of it. He could have thrown the key into a river. He did none of those things. He chose the path of least resistance. The path of silent loyalty. And in doing so he became an architect of the lie as well. Not the designer but the foreman, ensuring the walls stood, the windows were sealed, the illusion was maintained. His final act of betrayal was the most exquisite. Giving me the key. He could have destroyed the trunk as instructed. He could have let me live the rest of my life in the peaceful fiction. But he didn't. He placed the key in my hand. Was it because he thought I deserved the truth? Or was it because he could no longer bear the weight of being its sole keeper? Was his delivery an act of conscience or an act of desperation? Passing the burden to me so he could finally be free of it. He had unburdened himself onto my shoulders. He had transferred the pain from his conscience to my heart. And then he walked away. He did not stay to catch me when I fell. He did not call the next day to see if I was okay. He delivered the instrument of my destruction and vanished. That was the final statement of our friendship. I was not someone to be protected. I was a problem to be managed. And the management plan now was to make me the problem's owner. So I sat in the wreckage of two betrayals. One from the man who vowed to cherish me. One from the man who vowed to support that vow. They had made a pact. A pact sealed not with a handshake but with a tarnished brass key. And I, the woman at the center of it all, was the last to know, the last to understand, the last to feel the full crushing weight of their combined silence. The friend was gone. The husband was gone. All that remained was the key and the truth it unlocked. And the understanding that sometimes the keeper of the secret is just as guilty as the one who created it. Because he chose to let the lie live. He chose to water it with his silence. And in the end he chose to hand me the shears and let me be the one to cut it down. The work began in the silence. Not the silence of the empty house, that was a presence, an audience. The real work began in the quieter silence inside my own head. After the storms of grief and betrayal, after the frantic re-examining of every memory, after the exhausting inventory of the trunk, a stillness descended. It was not peace. Not yet. It was exhaustion. The exhaustion of a battlefield after the armies have moved on. Smoke clearing, revealing the scorched earth. I sat with the truth. I did not fight it anymore. I let it settle around me like fine ash. He lived another life. He had another family. He loved me in his way. Michael knew. My past was a fiction. These were the facts. Unchangeable as geography. I could rage against them or I could learn to read this new terrible map of my life. The first step was the trunk itself. I could not leave its contents spread on the bedroom floor like evidence in an unsolved crime. I had to decide what to do with the proof. Burning it felt dramatic, an act of vengeance he didn't deserve. Burying it felt like hiding, which was his specialty, not mine. Throwing it away felt disrespectful, not to him but to the sheer staggering reality of it. This was my history too now. A brutal, unwanted chapter, but mine nonetheless. So I repacked it. Slowly, methodically. Each folder, each photograph went back into its place. I did not look at them again. My fingers knew the shapes. The deed, the bank statements, the family portraits. I placed them all back into the dark leather belly of the trunk. But I added one thing of my own. From our hall closet I took our wedding album. The heavy white one with the gold script. Ernest and Eleanor. I opened it to the first page, a photograph of us cutting the cake. Young faces full of a future we didn't understand. I placed this album on top of his files. Our fiction atop his fiction. The story I believed over the story he lived. Then I closed the lid. The clunk of the latch was softer this time, final. I did not lock it. There was no point. The lock had done its job. It had kept the truth contained for 20 years. Its service was over. I called Michael, not the Michael in my contacts. I called his son my son. I asked him to come over with a friend. When they arrived, I did not explain. I simply pointed to the trunk in the closet. Please take this to the attic, I said. My voice was calm, flat. They looked puzzled, but they were good boys. They grunted with its weight carrying the past up the narrow pull-down stairs. I heard the thump as they set it down in the darkness above my head. A few minutes later they came down, dust on their shoulders. Where do you want it, Mom? My son asked. It's fine right where it is, I said. Thank you. And that was that. The trunk was moved from the bedroom closet, the space of our shared life, to the attic, the space of things no longer used but not yet discarded. Christmas decorations, old yearbooks, baby clothes, and now a steamer trunk full of a phantom life. It was where it belonged. Next came the house. My house. I started small. I moved his side of the dresser. I cleared out his nightstand. I did not do it with anger or tears. It was a practical task, like clearing a garden bed for new planting. I donated his clothes to a shelter. I kept one sweater, a thick cable knit one. Not because it smelled like him, but because it was warm and the yarn was a good quality. I would wear it to rake leaves. I changed the furniture in the bedroom. Not all of it, just the layout. I turned the bed to face the window. Now I woke to the sunrise instead of the wall he used to face. A small reorientation, a claiming of perspective. I called a landscaper. Ernest had loved roses, neat orderly bushes in straight soldier lines. Pruned and controlled. I had them all dug up. The landscaper looked horrified. They're healthy specimens, he said. I want a wildflower garden, I told him. Things that grow where they please. Things that attract bees and butterflies. He thought I was a sentimental old woman. Maybe I was. But when the black-eyed Susans and coneflowers and cosmos came in a tangled riot of color and motion, I would sit at the kitchen window and feel a strange defiant satisfaction. This mess of beauty was mine. It had no order, no plan. It just was. The legal things were handled by a polite woman at a law firm. I brought her the documents from the trunk. She did not flinch. Her professionalism was a bomb. There were no dramatics. She used words like fraud, and undue influence, and quiet title. She sent letters. There was no fight. Catherine did not contest. What could she say? The truth was on my side, even if it was a truth that gutted us both. The house, the pension, the accounts, they were secured as mine. Untouchable. It was not about taking from her. It was about protecting what was mine in the story he wrote. It was a financial severance from a life already emotionally severed. I wrote one letter myself. To Catherine. It was short. 3 sentences. Catherine, I know about you and the children. I wish you no ill will. All future communication should go through my lawyer. I did not sign it sincerely or best. I signed it Eleanor Grayson. My name. The name I shared with her. I mailed it. That was my only confrontation. It was not for her. It was for me. To state my knowledge into the universe. To mark the boundary. To say I am here. I exist in this story too. Then I waited. For what I didn't know. A response. An apology. A hurricane of drama. Nothing came. Just my own quiet mail in my own quiet box. The silence after sending that letter was the loudest silence of all. It was the sound of a chapter closing with no one on the other end to hear the thud. Time passed. A season. Then a year. The first anniversary of his death came and went. I did not visit his grave. The stone I had chosen felt like a monument to a stranger. I wondered if Catherine visited the other grave, the simpler one in Willow Creek. Beloved husband and father. We were 2 widows mourning 2 different men who shared a name and a face. There was a horrible symmetry to it. My health, the remaining rhythms of my body became my focus. The fatigue from the surgery, the grief, the shock, it ebbed slowly. I took walks. Not for joy but for motion. Putting one foot in front of the other was a prayer my body understood. I cooked simple meals. I ate at the table instead of over the sink. Small acts of dignity. I did not try to forgive. Forgiveness felt like a destination I had no map for. How do you forgive a lie that was also a life? How do you forgive the theft of your own history? I set that word aside. It was too big. Instead I worked on acceptance. Not acceptance of his actions but acceptance of the reality they created. This is the landscape. These are the facts. Now how do I live here? The answer came slowly in moments. Sitting on the porch with a cup of tea watching the wildflowers sway. Not thinking of anything, just feeling the sun on my skin. In that moment there was no past, no future. Just the warmth. And it was enough. Finding a book I loved and losing myself in a story that had a beginning, a middle and an end. A story where people were who they said they were. Laughing at something silly my granddaughter said. The sound of my own laugh startled me. It was rusty but real. It did not cancel the grief. It existed beside it. I began to understand that I was not one woman. I was many. The young woman who loved Ernest. The wife who built a home. The betrayed woman on the closet floor. The widow. The survivor. These women did not all like each other. The young bride was furious with the survivor for her cold practicality. The betrayed woman was jealous of the wife's innocent happiness. But they all had to live in the same house now. My house. My body. They had to learn to sit at the same table. The work was to stop the civil war inside me. To let each one have her say and then to tell them all it was time to rest. The past was over. We live here now. One morning I was clearing the hall closet. I found his old fishing hat. The one he wore on his trips. It was crumpled on a high shelf. I took it down. It smelled of stale sweat and lake water and him. I held it. I waited for the tsunami of pain. It didn't come. Instead there was a simple deep sadness. A sadness for him too. For the man who felt he needed two lives to be complete. For the exhausting logistical nightmare he lived. For the love he could never fully give to anyone because it was always divided. In that moment I did not hate him. I pitied him. I put the hat in the donation bag. No ceremony. No tears. Just a release. A letting go of a prop from a play that had ended. The key itself I kept. It sits now in a small ceramic dish on my dresser. Next to loose buttons and a spare button battery. It is just a piece of metal. It has no power, I do not give it. Sometimes I pick it up. It is warm from the room. It is just a key. It cannot hurt me anymore. The truth it unlocked did not set me free in some glorious Hollywood way. Freedom is too light a word. It grounded me. It rooted me in reality no matter how harsh. And from that solid ground, however barren, something new could grow. Not a replacement for what was lost. Something else entirely. A life of my own making. A singular life. He loved me in his way. A way that included locked trunks and separate families and a key held in trust. A way that was ultimately too small. But I loved him too. In my way. A way that believed in promises, that respected boundaries, that built a home within the walls he provided. That love was real. It just lived in a different story than his. And maybe that is the final secret the trunk revealed. Not just the secret of his other life but the secret of my own resilience. That I was here all along. Living, breathing, loving. Waiting, though I didn't know it, for the day when the story would be mine alone to tell. And this quiet, this sun, this unkempt garden, this breath in my lungs, this is my story now. It is not a happy story. But it is a true one. And it is enough. And so, my dear friends, we come to the end of this quiet, devastating journey. The story does not end with a reunion or a revenge, but with a woman in a sunlit room, learning how to breathe a different air. The air of truth, however bitter, is clearer than the sweetest lie. This is what I have learned. A secret is not just a hidden fact. It is a thief of time, a parasite on memory. It rewrites your past the moment you discover it, leaving you a stranger in your own history. But from that scorched earth, a different kind of strength can grow, not the strength of forgetting, but the strength of seeing clearly. The key opened a door to a terrible room, but it also opened a window. And on the other side of that window, I finally saw myself. Not as a wife, not as half of a pair, but as a whole person, standing on my own ground. So if you are holding a key of your own, trembling with the weight of what it might open, remember this: you survived the life you didn't know about. You can survive the truth of it. And on the other side of that survival, there is a profound and quiet peace. It is not the peace of a storybook ending. It is the peace of knowing exactly where you stand, even if you stand alone. Cherish your truth, my dears. Protect your peace. And never be afraid to close a door that was built on a lie.